Could the 49ers be the first team since 2008 with 3 1,000-yard receivers on the roster in 2022? What about a potential Jimmy Garoppolo for Kareem Hunt trade? Kareem Hunt wants out of Cleveland. That and so much more. Who's going to win the wide receiver 3 battle that we didn't even know was going to be so much of a battle coming into camp? All that and more coming up on this edition of Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker with you at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker. If you're new to the show, hello, I'm Brian Peacock, NFL analyst, co-host of the Peacock and Williamson NFL show right here on the network. Croc, former AFL, NFL cornerback. He's looking for his Arena Bowl ring right now to show the folks on YouTube. Arena Bowl champion.
Hold on. He's coming.
Co-host of Locked On NFL Draft. I think he found it. I thought the cat might have run away with it. There you go. Look at the jewelry there. Look at that shiny thing that was well earned by Eric Crocker, former #1 overall pick in the Arena League expansion draft, by the way. What's it like being 1.1 Croc, the #1 pick in a draft?
Well, the Arena draft isn't like this big thing, especially like the expansion draft, which there were multiple teams involved in it. So I didn't know anything about it. Then I got a phone call. My guy was like, do you know you were the #1 overall pick in this expansion draft? I'm like, wait, what? Like, what are you talking about? And it was cool because almost like Deebo Samuel, there was a situation I had in San Antonio. They owned my rights when I was released by the New York Jets. So I told them, like, I don't want to play for y'all again. Like, I'm not showing up. I didn't want to deal with that head coach. He kept trying to bring in guys to replace me my rookie year, and I played well. I played well, started every single game. But for some reason, the head coach, he was kind of, I don't know, it was kind of this weird dynamic. And I was like, I don't want to go back to that. So I had told them that, but they were like, oh, no, we're not letting you go. But then they made me available in the expansion draft, maybe thinking like, oh, he's not going to get picked. And that team said, not only is he getting picked, he's getting picked #1 overall. And I had a good year. I had 11 interceptions that year. I did my thing.
Yeah, you don't leave Eric Crocker exposed. He's going to get snatched up real quick. That is clear. Yeah. That is clear.
It is kind of cool when I look back on it.
No, that's cool. That's a good thing to put on your resume, to be the #1.
Really, one thing I was kind of going through in that time, and I think my mental health is typically really good, but I might have been, I don't want to say suffering from depression, but my dad had died during my time with the Jets. And I remember kind of just going through the motions and really football not being very important to me. And it wasn't until I was picked #1 overall to where it was like, boom, like the light bulb went off, like, and I kind of snapped out of that funk I was in, got up and I started training and going hard. And so maybe that kind of, motivated me and saved me. But it was a cool thing. #1 overall. A lot of people can't say that.
And that was Portland, right?
That was to Portland. Yep. Had a great time. Portland, the weather sucks in the Pacific Northwest, but Portland was beautiful in like June and July. It was hot, but they had all these festivals. You got the water, like the night, like that part was good. But outside of that, man, it rained too much for me. And it kind of out here, but it rains in the South, but it's like a different kind of rain. Like it'll rain random, and then it'll clear up and it's sunny. Out there in Portland, it was just always gloomy, cold. It was, like dang near year round. Like, oh yeah, it wasn't cool.
And then how'd you end up with, I don't think I've asked you this question. How'd you go from Portland to San Jose?
So my Portland, when I got drafted there, I only signed a 1-year contract. And I had told myself, like, I'm not going to ask for anything extra because people, get paid under the table, all kind of stuff. But I said, you know what? I'm going to go there. I'm going to ball out and I'm going to be in high demand come next offseason. And I went, balled out, and I was in high demand. Literally every team called me and offered me a contract.
Nice. So you picked your spot. You came back home.
I picked my spot. I was going to go home no matter what. It was either San Jose or Vegas. Vegas had a team. And Vegas, it was a sweet deal, but it meant a lot to me to be close to home and play in front of my family and friends. And, I'd have like 50 family members at every game. So my kids were there. Like that was more important. But, San Jose still took care of me. But, yeah.
Nice. And then won the title. with the San Jose SaberCats.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a career. How about the 49ers this year? Got a good question here from Explosivo about the 49ers wide receiver trio, especially with the training camp that Brandon Aiyuk is having. There have only been 5 1,000-yard receiving trios in NFL history. Most recently, Larry Fitzgerald, Anquan Bolden, and Steve Breston in 2008. Who do you think has the best chance of joining that club, and why do you think it's Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk, and George Kittle in 2022, Croc?
No, seriously. They truly do. There's a couple of teams that can kind of fight for that. And the 49ers are one of them. I'd say probably the Cincinnati Bengals with Tyler Boyd. He's been a 1,000-yard receiver. T. Higgins, he's been a 1,000-yard receiver. Jamar Chase, obviously a 1,000-yard receiver his rookie year. So those are two of the teams where you look at some of the weapons. And again, you think that, oh, well, will the 49ers pass enough? But because of the personnel that they use, a lot of 21 personnel. Well, half the time it's like 21, or half the time it's I want to say 11 personnel. But anyways, the tight end and those two receivers, they're going to be on the field a lot. And if you watch just their usage, even in training camp, and I know everybody talks about Trey Lance getting on the same page with Deebo Samuel. That's down the field. The short and intermediate stuff, they were connecting there. There was some third down, move the ball drills. He was throwing the ball to Deebo Samuel. Obviously, Aiyuk was getting his. George Kittle, especially on Saturday, he threw the ball to George Kittle a ton, and especially in like 2-minute drills. So those guys, and I know a lot of people are thinking like, oh, they're not going to pass a whole lot. They can pass enough for those guys, each of them, to get 1,000 yards. And got to factor in that extra game too. I think that makes it just a little bit easier.
So looking at last year's stats, I thought it was going to be more difficult. And I don't know what I would think the hardest part is just because of the volume. Are the 49ers with the first-year quarterback going to throw the ball enough? Is there going to be enough volume there, especially with, maybe some of the pass attempts become scrambles with Trey Lance making a play. They're going to lean heavy on the running game, I'm sure, play a lot of defense, play keep away a lot of times if they get an early lead. So I don't know if the volume is going to be there. But even last year, the volume wasn't crazy under Jimmy Garoppolo. He threw for 3,800 yards in his 15 starts. So he missed a couple starts, or else he would have been a 4,000-yard passer. And there might be more shots down the field, maybe a little bit less efficiency, obviously, with Trey Lance. But is the volume enough? And when you look at what the 49ers did last year receiving-wise, George Kittle and Brandon Aiyuk were pretty darn close already. George Kittle had 910 yards, and I don't think he's going to get targeted any less.
And one second, that was with George Kittle only playing 14 out of the 17 games.
Yep, yeah. Deebo missed the one game. He played 16 games. I think he left one of the games as well. He had 1,400 yards, and that's not counting, his extra running usage either. So 1,400 yards receiving. If if Aiyuk eats into 200 yards worth of Deebo's numbers, and Deebo drops to 1,200 yards receiving, which would be an awesome season, now that puts Deebo over 1,000 because he was at 826 yards last year and in the doghouse to start the season. Didn't even start at the beginning of the year. Right. He was at 826. So he could jump up to 1,000 pretty quick. George Kittle's been there before. He was really close last year. I think they got a pretty darn good shot to do it.
If there was a way to put money on it with Bet Online, if they had a future bet with 49ers having 3 receivers go over 1,000, I'd definitely smash the over on that.
Yeah, maybe like a parlay. If they had each one of them, if they get 1,000, then you hit all 3.
Or just bet on each one of their over-unders and take the over, which would probably, I'd assume, I would have to look into that. I think we got a Bet Online ad today. But I'd assume that those guys would, their numbers for their over-unders would probably be similar to what they had last year, except for Deebo's. I'd assume his would probably be around 1,100 yards.
We do not have a Bet Online ad today, and I don't know if I can find it quick enough for the player props. I'll start looking at that, but it's certainly doable for this group. And 2 out of the 3 have already done it, and Aiyuk has been pretty darn close. Both his first 2 seasons, it hasn't even been full utilization. The question is, how much will Aiyuk eat into the others, and will there be enough volume? Like if there's a lot of volume, then I think it would be easy for all 3 to do it. And I think the way this group might be that type of season where one game George Kittle leads the team in receiving. The next game it's Deebo. The next game it's Aiyuk. It might be just like, one or the other, and not so much like all Deebo all the time with the other guys playing number 2 and number 3. It might be depending on the game. This player goes off this week. This player gets a chance next week. It's a Kittle game this week. That might be what we see, especially with a fully healthy offense. And I mean, we already know that there's a pretty good rapport going on from between Trey Lance and Brandon Aiyuk. So that's all the more reason to believe that maybe, and like Deebo's going to get his, and there will be planned touches for Deebo, even if he's not getting a ton of downfield throws through the course of the game. But I think he's going to get those too. But oh yeah, here we go. I've got the lines right here. So Deebo, okay, what is this? Oh, that's just to lead the league in receiving yards. That's not for an individual. Yeah, I don't see it here for Deebo anyway. If anybody sees the lines on those, let us know. Hit it in the YouTube comments at BD Peacock, at Eric_Crocker on Twitter. But man, I like it. I like the 49ers opportunity right now to have 3,000 yard receivers. That'd be something with the first year starting quarterback, by the way, too.
It would. And I'm looking at the total passing attempts last season for the 49ers just to see if they can kind of get some of the total yards that they had. Now, I know everybody's kind of looking at it and it's like, oh, can they throw a lot? They don't throw a whole lot. The 49ers, based off of last season, and again, this number will start to jump up because there are 17 games a season. So the way we've used to view 4,000 passing yards in a season, you kind of have to erase that out of your mind. All right. But the 49ers threw for 4,437 yards last season. And again, that's with them averaging 30 passing attempts per game. And obviously there's some games where you're going to throw a lot more. There's some games where you're going to throw less. So can the 49ers pass the ball, on average 27 times a game? And if so, I think that would be over 4,000 yards. So if you said, hey, 3 guys have over 1,000 and then, other guys, the others just contribute and have, 200, 250, 300, et cetera. I think the 49ers would be in good shape to be able to do that with the trio of pass catchers.
All right, we got a couple other questions. What is that going to look like with Aiyuk and Deebo? Somebody get traded next offseason. And then a question about who the wide receiver 3 is and how many targets are going to be there for the rest of the wide receiver group if so many are going to the top 3 receivers on the 49ers roster. We'll get to all that and more coming up on this edition of Locked On 49ers. But, Croc, there's something almost as important going on in the world right now. You know what that is? That is the peanut butter bars are back at built.com. I'm pumped for it. Multiple different flavors of peanut butter. My favorite is still from day one until now. They've got a ton of amazing flavors of Built bars. The traditional peanut butter has just always been my number one, and nothing has ever knocked it off, including the new cookie dough chunk puff, which is fantastic. And judging by the DMs, Croc, I know you talked about them. You love the cookie dough chunk puffs. Did that knock off your favorite, which is birthday cake puffs? And I hope you're enjoying the bag I dropped to you in Santa Clara at 49ers camp. There it is, the birthday cake Built bar, endorsed by Eric Crocker as his number one. Cookie dough chunk puffs, though, is the newest, and it's fantastic. Chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. All the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. Only 160 calories in the cookie dough chunk puff bars and a whopping 15 grams of protein. So when you're looking for a snack, Built Bar is exactly what you want because it is high in protein to keep you powered through your day and not crash. Low in sugar, low in calories, the perfect combination. And oh yeah, most Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. So go to Built.com right now. Use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Thanks again, everybody, for making Locked On 49ers your first listen. For your second, third, fourth listens, make sure you're checking out the Peacock and Williamson NFL show, Locked On NFL Draft. And it's time to get ready for your fantasy football leagues with Locked On Fantasy Football as well, and fantasy expert Vinny Iyer, who brings you over 20 years of NFL expertise and a unique angle to give you the moves no one else has. Get ready for your fantasy draft with Locked On Fantasy Football. All those shows available right here on the network. Okay, Croc, real quick question here. I want to talk about wide receiver 3, and obviously a big part of that is what's happening in camp with any of these position battles. But Nuku has a question. He says, do you think Lance and Aiyuk offseason workouts will make it harder for Deebo to get his catches, leading to a trade of Deebo in 2023? I think yes and no. Deebo can't be traded. His contract, he's going to be here for a while. I think it's more likely Aiyuk gets traded. But if Aiyuk and Trey Lance have this great connection, what do you do there? I don't know if you can pay both of them. So that will be interesting going forward as far as who gets paid and all of that kind of stuff. But at this point right now, they don't need to do anything. Ayuk's got he's just like Deebo, or actually he's got a 5th-year option the year after that too. So they wouldn't be forced really to trade Deebo until after next year, after 2023 probably. Then something could potentially happen with either Deebo or Brandon Aiyuk. But if there's a connection between Aiyuk and and Trey Lance, and clearly there is, I think he could absolutely eat into that Deebo production.
I think you definitely keep Ayuk around, especially if they have that rapport, right? Ayuk, younger than Deebo Samuel, I think it gets to a point where you are able to kind of ride it out with Deebo, and then even on that last year, because I mean, I guess it's essentially a 4-year extension when you count this season, but you only have him maybe 1 year. You'll have Deebo 1 year after Brandon Ayuk's 5th-year option. So I think there's a scenario where you could pay Ayuk, and there's going to be one overlapping year where you're paying both guys a good amount of money. Maybe by that time, again, we're talking about 3-4 years down the line, where the 49ers still have George Kittle, because he's not getting any younger. How old is George Kittle right now?
He's 29. I think he's turning 30 at some point this year.
Right. So, we're talking about George Kittle being, 33, 34. Do they still have him on the roster? I hope so, right? Great player. Awesome. And that's the tough thing about guys that play like 4 years at a university. He might have even redshirted because he was like really skinny coming in.
Yeah, he was a 5th-year senior. But tight ends age better than some other positions too. No, George Kittle's only 28, turning 29 in October.
Oh, okay. Nah, he's gonna be there then. And because he takes incredible care of his body.
Yeah, he does. He does take a lot of punishment.
Did you watch him, like just how lean he looked? There are times where at practice I'm like, man, George Kittle looks like a receiver out there. Like he's just thin and he's kind of like rocked up and he has abs and all that.
Yeah, his frame reminds me of Patrick Willis, who was built like that, where he was definitely built for speed and he was rocked up and muscled up and strong, but he's also lean. I remember when Patrick Willis back in the day came into the restaurant, the bar I was working at, ordered himself a burger well done and sent it back because it wasn't cooked enough. We've talked about that before on the show. It's the nicest guy in the world. He came in with his girlfriend that I believe it eventually became his wife. A super nice guy, but I was like, man, he's built like a wide receiver when he's walking around in plain clothes without those shoulder pads on. I was surprised how small he was and how slim he was, even though he was, crazy built and strong. Yeah. And that's how George Kittle is well. Definitely built for speed and then muscled up on top of it.
Yeah, but we were talking about the two receivers and a potential trade. I think Deebo Samuel rides out his contract, and they're just going to have that overlapping season, and I think the 49ers are fine with that. And then you'll see what you get from Deebo Samuel as he's entering kind of his year 30 and whatnot. Does he continue to be very productive? And we've seen guys be productive. Got to take care of your body to be able to last that long. And that once you get closer to 30, it's even more pivotal. And I remember, like, my last year playing with the Sabercats, I was 28 years old. And even then, I can just feel like, damn, I'm starting to feel a little older. And I took care of my body. I worked out. I did all those things. But you just start to kind of feel it a little bit. And we'll see if Deebo can hold on. But I'd assume that there's an overlapping year there. And then eventually maybe they move on as they kind of bring in another younger guy. So, again, that's way down the line. But if Aiyuk continues to kind of, if it looks like what it looks like right now in training camp, he is someone that can be like your legit wide receiver one, and then you have Deebo Samuel, who will still be very productive, and that was part of it too. He's going to get his, even if he doesn't get a bunch of targets, which he had 120 targets. That's a good amount. But there's so many ways to get him the ball, and we see what he does after the catch. So I don't even think he needs a ton of touches to be extremely productive.
And the other thing with Deebo, and I think you're totally right there. I think after the 2024 season is when maybe a hard decision could get made with one of those guys and potentially moving on from Deebo if there becomes a roster crunch as far as who's getting paid and you got to pay Aiyuk. But I think it is overlapped in a way because of the 5th-year option. And so Aiyuk was drafted a year later and has the 5th-year option as a first-round player. So that gives him 2 extra years after the Deebo contract as far as those overlaps go. But one thing that nobody's talking about with Deebo Samuel is the wideback thing happened mid-season. That was on the fly. Kyle Shanahan's had an entire offseason to figure out how he wants to use Deebo Samuel now. So I wonder how that wideback stuff will even mutate into something else and how what kind of wrinkles Kyle Shanahan comes up with now. So I think there could be a ton of different ways that Deebo Samuel gets used that I don't think we've exactly seen yet. So that's fun. And look,
listen to this.
Go ahead.
This is down the stretch when we start talking about him, being utilized as a wide back. It definitely happened towards the middle of the season. Looks like around week 9. So week 9 is when it like really started. Because before that he had 0 carries in the game, 2 carries, 2 carries, 1 carry, 1 carry, 0, 0, 0. And then week 9, boom, 5 carries for 36 yards. And that was when it really started. And the crazy thing about that game, if I'm seeing it correctly, 5 carries, 36 yards. He also had 5 receptions on 5 targets for 97 yards. So he had a big game there. One touchdown reception, 1 touchdown rush. Now, this is when there was kind of like this weird thing going on, and he also missed a game during this time. Week 10, Jacksonville, he had 1 reception on 2 targets, but 8 carries, 79 yards. Then the very next week against Minnesota, 1 reception on 4 targets, but he had 6 rushes for 66 yards. Right now, that's at this point, you're not even a wide back. You're just a change of pace. I mean, you're not a receiver. You're a change of pace running back. Then he missed the game, came back against Cincinnati, and it definitely looked weird. But 1 target, 1 reception, 22 yards. But he had 8 carries for 37 yards and a touchdown. Like, it was like a true wide back thing. So a bulk of his carries, I mean, and that kind of continued. 6 carries, 5 carries, 7 carries, 8 carries. That's just in the regular season. Then you get into the playoffs. Let's see, Dallas, 10 rushes. Matter of fact, in the playoffs, they actually have his rushing numbers listed first because he wasn't getting as much targets. So he has 10 carries for 72 yards against Dallas, 10 carries for 39 yards against Green Bay, 7 carries for 26 yards against the Rams, who were like just loading the box on the 49ers. Each of those games, he had more carries than receptions, than targets, except for the Rams game where he had 7 rushing attempts and 7 targets as well. So there definitely was a huge change in his usage. And I'm curious to see if they kind of give him the same volume of rushes and targets, but just spread out those rushes over more games because it started off kind of so slow with his rushing attempts.
You know what I am waiting for? This is the wrinkle that I think Kyle could add this year is Deebo gets motioned into the backfield, right? And then they use Deebo running routes, but as a running back.
They did that against Green Bay.
Yeah.
On the last drive, he ran that kind of angle route or whatever you want to call it, angle route, Texas route out of the backfield, and Jimmy threw it to him and hit him. So that's a big time wrinkle. Now, what I don't want to see is, can you not have him be pass protecting?
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, don't put him in the backfield and have him picking up blitzes, and we really don't need any runs up the middle either. Like, a couple times maybe you could show that look, but maybe even decoy Deebo in some cases when he's in the backfield. But open things up from other people. I think Kyle's probably been in the lab all offseason, and we might be able to see some fun stuff there with Deebo Samuel. But he's a wide receiver first, and wide back second.
Yeah.
Who's wide receiver 3, though, Croc? That's what we will get to next. And we've got some nuggets on potential trades for Jimmy G now with another quarterback injury. And we know why the 49ers hanging on to Jimmy a little bit longer, just in case. And we know who the starting quarterback is going to be for the Green Bay Packers when the 49ers hit the field Friday night in their preseason opener next. But I got to tell the folks about Dave. Hindsight is 2020. Can't change the past, but if you could, wouldn't you go get a little help from your future self? I think we all could have benefited from that at some point in our lives. Maybe you'd ask to borrow a little cash. Now you can with Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. Help buy the things you might need if you're running into a money crunch. Maybe, finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. Maybe you want to buy that extra piece of gear you need for your side hustle to make you more money and get you the real place you need to be financially. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch, if you need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's Dave, D-A-V-E. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Okay, Croc, Wide receivers 3. What do you think? I said yesterday that one of the standouts from camp of the practices I was at this weekend was Ray McCloud. And it was a distant fourth after him. And the fourth after him is probably not Juwan Jennings. It probably would have been the rookie Danny Gray. If I had to base what the 49ers depth chart was based on what I saw in practices, the 2 practices, again, small sample. It's just practices. It's just training camp. You can look, and there's been training camp heroes that have gone on to do nothing. And I think that's one of the reasons maybe we pump the brakes a little bit on Aiyuk, because you just don't know. You don't know how it's going to translate into the regular season. The preseason games are pretty important as well, especially for the bottom of the roster guys. And some of these
Malik Turner made some plays too. So if you want to say like someone who looks good one-on-ones, caught some passes in team, etc., he's another one you kind of lump into there.
Absolutely. Number 17, he was everywhere. He was targeted often. So if I had to rank the guys, well, clearly it's Aiyuk and Deebo. Aiyuk would be wide receiver 1 because he made the most plays. Deebo's starting with him. They're on the field with the ones. They're clearly 1 and 2. And some, classic Deebo usage. He's getting the ball in some other ways. But then after that, it was by far Ray McCloud to me. First of all, he's on special teams, so he's on the roster. He's catching punts. He is making plays, short, intermediate, made the best play of practice on Sunday, deep ball down the sideline between 2 defenders, great ball from Nate Sudfeld. Clearly he was third. And then it's Danny Gray, Malik Turner, and Juwan Jennings was almost a non-factor in the practices I was watching, and apparently it's been that way all training camp. He might have been targeted one time in 2 days when I was there. Didn't see him stand out in one-on-one Saturday. He hasn't been standing out in practices before that. It's been a very different Juwan Jennings than we expected to see, and you can't put too much into training camp, but he's been almost non-existent. You would expect a little something from the guy. So I don't know if it's wide open enough to where it's like, well, you haven't done anything in practices. You're not getting open enough, not making plays in practice. Is your roster spot up for grabs, or is it just that, okay, maybe Ray's going to get that slot work and we're going to go little slot more than big slot this year?
And I think the big slot is more so just being comfortable with him running routes. And, again, everyone wins differently. And I always say that. So if you just watch the 2 receivers, you're going to be like, well, Ray McCloud, clearly the more dynamic of the 2. But we have seen Juwan Jennings, when he was successful, a lot of his winning with positioning and needing a whole lot of separation to be able to win with route, just enough. And then he's a terrific run after catch guy. So I definitely don't want to discount that. But yeah, if you're just watching practice and what it looks like, it doesn't really look close between those 2 guys. And you talked about pumping the brakes on Brandon Aiyuk and hype and things like that. And maybe we're doing that a little bit too much with Ray McCloud, where it's like, oh, this guy's clearly better. Then he gets in the season and Kyle's not utilizing him. I will say this because I did speak with some people, and I think fans think when Ray McCloud, and this is kind of ingrained in their head, when the 49ers signed Ray McCloud, everyone said special teams, punt returner. Like, oh, man, they're taking special teams very serious. They went, they got a punt returner, you finally got your guy. But when you listen to Kyle Shanahan talk about it, he was like, oh, I signed him because he's a good receiver. And he does some things that we want him to do. And then it's like, oh, he does punt returns? Because he talks about, like, when you're watching all 22, and anyone out there who has access to all 22, when you're watching all 22 offense, it's only offense. It doesn't go from offense and then, it goes to, and watch him do punt returns and, watch him do a kickoff return. Like, no, when Kyle Shanahan sat down and he's like, okay, I want to watch Ray McCloud, it is him as a receiver. And I think his volume was really weird with Pittsburgh, where it was just a lot of short stuff. His yards per catch was ridiculously low, some of the lowest I've ever seen.
I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking at it right now. And I don't know if part of it was because of Roethlisberger, and Roethlisberger just couldn't throw anymore, and everything was super short with them. But he had 39 catches last year, only 277 yards, so 7.1 yards per reception, which is crazy, ridiculously low. How about this, though? The year before, he had 20 catches, so, half as many, but only 77 yards, 3.9 yards per reception in 2020 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he bounced around a little bit, Buffalo and Carolina. So he's been a journeyman. You wouldn't expect a journeyman to just be walk in and look that good compared to the other receivers. So is that talking about the 49ers depth isn't even actually that strong at receiver? Or is Ray McCloud, there's more to him? He was just playing with, the death rattle of Ben Roethlisberger last year, because he's making plays down the field for the 49ers too, which surprised me.
Yeah, and again, when you look at his yards per catch, you'd assume, well, he can't win vertically. And it's like, no, well, we've seen him win vertically. One, it happened in, I believe it was OTAs. I think Trey Lance hit him a deep ball down the left sideline, and a lot of people talked about that, where Brandon Aiyuk was like, touchdown McLeod right here. Do you remember that? Like that clip where
Yes.
Aiyuk was mic'd up and he talked about it and he hit him. So clearly he can win vertically. We heard about it in the OTAs. And then you see it in camp. He's cotton balls downfield. You just watch him catch a beautiful one down the field from Nate Sutherfield. So why was his yards per reception so drastically low? Which, again, wild to hear those numbers. 7 point whatever yards per catch, 3 point something yards per catch. How is that even possible with someone that is as dynamic as he is? And for at least what we've seen, maybe, again, we've been saying, oh, 49ers defense, they're great, great, great. Maybe some of them aren't that great. I don't know, because if he's been that for his career and that's who he is, he's shown to be someone a little bit different for the 49ers.
A couple more notes here before we're done. Just real quick, looking ahead to Friday night in Santa Clara when the 49ers host the Packers. It will be Jordan Love officially starting and not Aaron Rodgers. I don't think that's a surprise at all, according to Mike LaFleur, or Matt LaFleur, excuse me, head coach of the Packers. But Matt LaFleur said that maybe that Love will start the first 2 weeks, but maybe not the third week, because he didn't like how the team started last year and might have Aaron Rodgers start the third preseason game. And that got me thinking, is because traditionally the third preseason game was the best one where the starters played the longest. And then the fourth game is where everybody fighting for the last roster spots played a lot and the starters really didn't play. So how are teams going to treat it this year? This is our second year of having this, this format. So I think teams are still figuring it out. Are we just lopping off the fourth week? And so week 3 is still going to be the week where the guys play the most. And for the 49ers who have 3 games in 12 days, are you really going to want to throw your starters out there unless they just completely sit the first 2? So I wonder how the 49ers are going to play that. And Trey Lance, who needs the reps more than anybody, but you don't want to get the guy hurt either. That's an interesting one, because I would want to see him play a lot. He needs reps. That's the one thing Trey Lance needs the most.
It might just go off of what Kyle Shanahan sees. If in weeks 1 and 2, you see someone who is efficient and he's being able to execute, then maybe you just like, I don't have to play him in week 3. But if it goes a little bit more how kind of I expect to be up and down, right? Some of what we've seen in training camp, then you might need that third game to really see if you can potentially get him in a groove. The tough thing is, if you throw your starting quarterback out there, I'd assume you want to throw your other starters out there, and how long do you leave them in? I don't want to play Trent Williams. I don't want to play Mike McGlinchey if I don't have to, Nick Bosa, all these guys. But am I going to throw Trey Lance out there who, oh man, a little up and down. I want to be a little bit more confident going into week 1 and just know a little bit more of where he's at. That's a tough little dynamic there. So I'd assume it's based off of how does Trey look the first couple of weeks? How does he look in the practice against Minnesota Vikings out there? And if those things go well, then you likely won't see him week 3. But if they don't go well, then you need that week to just continue to get him those reps. I'm excited to see him and Jordan Love on the field at the same time, right? Because Jordan Love is someone who a lot of people wrote off. And I bet when people are like, oh, Jordan Love can't play, et cetera, some of the things he was going through, it's probably a lot of things that Lance is going through right now. But when you have Aaron Rodgers ahead of you, you don't get to just get those live reps to try to get those kinks out, right? And looking at him in the scrimmage that they had with Green Bay, you start to see him making those throws. And it's like, well, yeah, he's been in the system going on 3 years now, and he's probably a little bit more comfortable with what he's seeing and maybe some of the weapons that he's throwing to downfield. And you might see him continue to improve, and I think this would be a good thing, and damn near showcasing for the other teams, because Aaron Rodgers ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, that's true. That would be a Jordan Love showcase, and apparently he is having a pretty good camp for the Packers. Last one here, and we've got to address it because I got asked by a million different people today about maybe Jimmy G for Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt asked for a trade from the Browns. Browns said no, they don't want to trade him, but waiting for the new ruling on Deshaun Watson. If that ends up being a year, what do you think? Jimmy G, let's revisit this. Jimmy G for Kareem Hunt. What do you think, Croc?
No. I mean, just 49ers have their running backs. You have Elijah Mitchell. He's your one. Ty Davis Price, he looked like he started to come into his own. You have Trey Sermon. I just don't think you give up on your young guys, especially to, ship off or get something. If you're going to trade Jimmy Garoppolo, you want something in return. I would assume that you just don't have. Now, if you're talking about maybe a center or where else? I mean, the 49ers always need interior defensive line. Maybe a nickel corner that they have. They have an extra corner, which they do. Real quick, let me try to pull up their depth chart, and that is the Cleveland Browns. But there's a scenario where they have a cornerback kind of log jam a little bit, where maybe they can kind of give up a guy. Let's see who they have. So they have Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome starting. So then there's guys like, Greedy Williams. Maybe they'd be willing to get rid of him. Now, he's not a nickel. That's a tough thing there. So, yeah, I don't know. It would have to be a different position, not running back. It's too easy to get production out of running backs to where I'm not going to trade Jimmy Garoppolo for a back when I can get production out of these guys I have.
Yeah, and you don't want to start paying more for your running back room than you have to either.
Right. Which is exactly why they'll probably do it, because I feel like they always do that, right? Where you don't think they need a running back, and it's like, we're gonna go spend all these resources on the back, and it's gonna cost a lot of money. And it's like, wait a minute, dude, you don't even need this guy.
And I could see it as a way of the 40. What about sending Trey Sermon back to Ohio or something as part of the deal, so they get a running back, and that helps the 49ers get a draft pick back with, I don't know. It's a tough situation, but just Jimmy G for Hunt. I mean, Hunt would be so good in Kyle Shanahan's offense, though, too, So I could see why the 49ers would do it. I would probably say no to that, though, as well.
Right. I would say no. Kyle, he probably we're just trying to get better. We're always trying to get better at every position.
What if it's like, okay, there's only two options. Either you trade Jimmy G for Kareem Hunt. That's the only offer for Jimmy. Or you release Jimmy and he signs with the Seahawks. Do you do a trade just to make sure he doesn't go to Seattle?
Gosh. Yeah. Well, nah. I'm not one of those guys that just, go ahead. Like, he's sorry, like he's going to help the 49ers. Like, nah, man. Like, Jimmy Garoppolo makes the Seattle Seahawks better. But I don't want to take on that running back. I'd release him and roll over that money and just have that cap space. But then I guess Seattle can get him anyway, so I don't know.
Yep, I agree with you. All right, unless you can get a pick back too. If a pick is part of it, then I would be okay with a package like that. But,
yeah.
All right, good stuff. Thanks everybody for listening and making Locked On 49ers your first listen every day. Make sure you're checking out everything else the network has to offer. Your team is covered no matter the sport. Croc and I back tomorrow, another Winky Wednesday right here, Locked On 49ers.